As you take your first breath this morning, a startling realization settles in. Nothing will ever be the same. The air feels heavier, as if the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for you to notice the subtle shift beneath the surface of your own mind. You sit up, the sheets tangled around your legs, and for a moment you are suspended between sleep and waking, between the comfort of ignorance and the raw edge of awareness. The room is unchanged, yet everything is different. The familiar objects, your books, your phone, the half-drunk glass of water on the nightstand, seem to shimmer with a new, unsettling significance. It's as if you are seeing them for the first time, or perhaps as if you are seeing yourself for the first time. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the very thing that makes you exceptional, the sharpness of your mind, the relentless curiosity, the hunger for understanding, is also the thing that threatens to undo you. Picture yourself opening your eyes to a world where intelligence is not a gift, but a double-edged sword, a blade that cuts both ways. You find yourself standing at the edge of a new reality, the truth dawning on you all at once. The smarter you become, the more elaborate the traps you set for yourself, the more you know, the more you suffer, the more you see, the more you wish you could unsee. Suddenly, you're faced with a moment that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the value of intellect, the pursuit of knowledge, the meaning of progress. You remember the stories you were told as a child, how the clever ones always found a way out, how the wise were revered, how the thinkers shaped the world. But now, as the morning light creeps across the floor, you sense a darker story unfolding beneath the surface, a story in which the brightest minds are not the saviors, but the architects of their own destruction. Why is it that those who see the most, who understand the deepest, so often find themselves lost in labyrinths of their own making? Why do the most brilliant minds spiral into despair, self-doubt, and even madness, while others move through life with a kind of blissful ignorance? Is it possible that intelligence, far from being the key to happiness, is the very thing that locks the door? You feel the weight of these questions pressing down on you, heavy as gravity, inescapable as fate. You think of the philosophers who stared into the abyss and found it staring back. You think of the artists who burned with vision until they were consumed by their own fire. You think of the scientists who unraveled the mysteries of the universe, only to find themselves unraveling in turn. What is it about the act of thinking, of truly, deeply thinking, that leads so many to the brink? There is a paradox here, one that gnaws at the edges of your mind. The world tells you to strive, to learn, to grow, to become more than you are. Yet the higher you climb, the thinner the air becomes, the more treacherous the path. The summit, once so alluring, now looms like a warning. What if the pursuit of knowledge is not a ladder to the heavens, but a spiral staircase descending into darkness? What if the very act of seeking truth is what drives you further from peace? You remember moments in your own life when your mind turned against you, when overthinking became a prison, when insight became isolation, when understanding brought only sorrow. You recall the sleepless nights spent wrestling with questions that had no answers, the gnawing sense that the more you learned, the less you belonged. You see it in others too, the friend who can't stop analyzing every word, the colleague who drowns in possibilities, the genius who can't escape the gravity of their own thoughts. Is this the price of intelligence? To see too much, to feel too deeply, to be forever haunted by the knowledge that nothing is ever as simple as it seems? Or is there something else at work, a hidden force, a flaw in the design, a cosmic joke at the expense of the clever? As you move through your morning routine, the questions follow you like shadows. You brush your teeth, but the taste of uncertainty lingers. You shower, but the doubts cling to your skin. You dress, but the armor of reason feels thin, almost transparent. Every action is tinged with a sense of unreality, as if you are playing a part in a drama whose script you no longer understand. You think of the world outside of the endless scroll of news, the ceaseless chatter of opinions, the relentless march of progress. Everywhere, people are striving to be smarter, faster, better. But beneath the surface, you sense a quiet desperation, a hunger that can never be satisfied. The smarter we become, the more we realize how little we know. The more we achieve, the more hollow our victories feel. The more we connect, the more isolated we become. What if the very structure of intelligence is flawed? What if the mind, in its quest for mastery, sows the seeds of its own undoing. You recall the myth of Icarus, soaring ever higher until the sun melts his wings. You think of Prometheus, punished for bringing fire to humanity. You wonder if every act of creation carries within it the possibility of destruction. You look in the mirror and see not just your own reflection, but the reflection of every thinker who has ever lived. You see the lines of worry etched into your brow, the flicker of doubt in your eyes. You see the weight of knowledge pressing down on your shoulders, the burden of understanding that cannot be set aside. You wonder if there is a way out, or if the only escape is to stop thinking altogether. But even as you ask these questions, you know you cannot turn back. The mind once awakened cannot return to sleep. The eyes once opened cannot unsee. You are caught in a paradox, the very thing that makes you human. The capacity to question, to reason, to imagine, is also the thing that threatens to destroy you. You step outside, the world bathed in the pale light of dawn. The city hums with activity, each person lost in their own thoughts, their own struggles. You wonder how many of them feel the same tension, the same sense of being trapped by their own intelligence. You wonder how many have found a way to make peace with their minds, and how many are still searching. As you walk, the questions grow louder, more insistent. Why do we sabotage ourselves? Why do the smartest among us so often become their own worst enemies? Is it a flaw in the wiring, a glitch in the code, or something deeper, something woven into the very fabric of consciousness? You think of the stories you've heard, the prodigies who burned out, the visionaries who lost their way, the thinkers who turned their brilliance inward until it became a weapon. You think of the times you've seen it in yourself, the self-doubt, the perfectionism, the endless second-guessing. You wonder if there is a pattern, a hidden logic to the madness. Is it possible that intelligence is not a blessing but a curse? That the very qualities that set us apart, our ability to reason, to imagine, to create, are also the ones that lead us to ruin? Or is there something else at play, something we have yet to understand? You pause at a crosswalk, the traffic rushing past in a blur of color and sound. For a moment you feel suspended between worlds, the world of the mind, with its endless possibilities and pitfalls, and the world of the senses, immediate and unyielding. You wonder which is more real, which is more dangerous. As you continue on your way, the paradox deepens. The smarter you become, the more you see the cracks in the foundation, the flaws in the system, the emptiness at the heart of things. The more you understand, the more you realize how little you can control. The more you strive for meaning, the more elusive it becomes. You think of the philosophers who warned against the dangers of unchecked reason, the poets who sang of the madness that lies at the heart of genius, the mystics who spoke of the need to transcend the mind altogether. You wonder if they were right, if the only way to survive is to let go of the need to know. But how can you let go when the need to understand is woven into your very being? How can you stop thinking when thought is the air you breathe, the ground you walk on, the light that guides you through the darkness? You arrive at your destination, but the journey is far from over. The questions linger, unresolved, like a melody that refuses to end. You sense that you are on the brink of a revelation, that the answer is just out of reach. You feel the tension building, the sense of something vast and terrible waiting to be uncovered. As you stand at the threshold of your day, you realize that you are not alone. Across time and space, others have stood where you stand now, caught between the promise of intelligence and the threat of self-destruction. Their stories echo in your mind, a chorus of voices urging you to look deeper, to question harder, to seek the truth no matter the cost. And so you take another breath and another, each one a step further into the unknown. The paradox remains, unresolved, a riddle wrapped in a mystery, but you cannot turn away. The journey has begun, and there is no going back. What if the greatest danger lies not in what we do not know, but in what we cannot unknow? What if the mind, in its brilliance, is destined to be both creator and destroyer, savior and executioner, light and shadow? What if the only way forward is through the darkness, into the heart of the paradox itself? The questions hang in the air, heavy and unanswerable, but you sense that the real journey is only beginning. The truth is out there, waiting to be found, or perhaps waiting to find you. And as the day unfolds, you carry the weight of that realization with you. A silent companion, a reminder that the smartest minds are not immune to destruction. In fact, they may be its favorite prey. The stage is set, the paradox revealed. The next step is to uncover the hidden forces that drive this self-destruction, to peer into the depths of the mind and see what lies beneath. But for now, you are left with the question, the great unanswerable question that will haunt you until the end. Why do smart minds fuel their own destruction? You move through the day with the question echoing in your mind, a low, persistent hum beneath every thought. The world around you seems unchanged, but you sense the invisible machinery at work, the gears and levers of the psyche grinding away, shaping every action, every hesitation, every silent scream. You begin to wonder, what is this hidden force that turns intelligence against itself? What ancient flaw, what secret wound, festers beneath the surface of the brightest minds? You recall the words of Carl Jung, who spoke of the shadow, the dark, unacknowledged parts of the self that lurk just beyond the reach of consciousness. Jung warned that the more we identify with the light of intellect, the more our shadow grows, gathering strength in the darkness. You wonder if this is the root of the problem, that intelligence in its hunger for clarity casts ever deeper shadows, creating monsters it cannot see, let alone control. You think of Friedrich Nietzsche, who gazed into the abyss and found it gazing back. Nietzsche understood the danger of unchecked intellect, the way it can spiral into nihilism, stripping the world of meaning until only emptiness remains. He saw how the mind, in its quest for truth, can become a devouring fire, consuming everything in its path, including itself. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster, Nietzsche warned. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. You feel the chill of those words, the sense that every act of understanding is also an act of self-destruction. But it is not just the philosophers who have seen the danger. The psychologists, too, have mapped the terrain of the mind and found it riddled with traps. You remember reading about the concept of overexcitability, the idea that gifted individuals experience the world with greater intensity, their senses and emotions dialed up to 11. This heightened sensitivity, while a source of creativity and insight, can also become a curse, leading to anxiety, depression, and a sense of alienation from the world. The very qualities that set the intelligent apart also set them adrift, cut off from the comfort of belonging. You think of Arthur Schopenhauer, who saw life as a ceaseless struggle driven by a blind, insatiable will. For Schopenhauer, intelligence was not a path to happiness, but a curse that made suffering more acute. The more you understand, the more you see the futility of desire, the endless cycle of striving and disappointment. A man can do what he wants, Schopenhauer wrote, but not want what he wants. You feel the weight of that paradox, the sense that freedom of thought is an illusion, that the mind is both prisoner and jailer. You remember Aldous Huxley, who warned of the dangers of too much knowledge, too much awareness. In his dystopian visions, Huxley saw how intelligence, unmoored from meaning, could become a tool of self-destruction, a way to anesthetize the soul, to drown in endless stimulation and distraction. You wonder if this is the fate of the modern mind, to be bombarded by information, paralyzed by choice, numbed by the sheer weight of possibility. Jean-Paul Sartre comes to mind, his existentialist cry echoing through the corridors of your thoughts. Sartre saw consciousness as a curse, a wound that never heals. To be aware is to be condemned to freedom, to the burden of choice, to the terror of meaninglessness. The intelligent mind, Sartre argued, is always at war with itself, torn between the desire for certainty and the impossibility of ever attaining it. You feel the truth of this in your own life, the endless second-guessing, the fear of making the wrong choice, the sense that every decision is a leap into the void. And then there is Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in the midst of unimaginable suffering. Frankl understood that the mind, left to its own devices, can become a torture chamber, a place where hope withers and despair takes root. But he also saw that meaning is not given, but created. That even in the darkest moments we have the power to choose our response. You wonder if this is the key, that intelligence, for all its dangers, also contains the seeds of redemption. But the problem runs deeper than any one thinker, any single theory. It is woven into the fabric of society, into the stories we tell ourselves about what it means to be smart, to be successful, to be human. From an early age, you are taught to value intelligence above all else, to prize the quick answer, the clever solution, the dazzling insight. You are rewarded for thinking, for questioning, for pushing the boundaries of what is known. But no one tells you about the cost, the sleepless nights, the gnawing doubt, the sense of being forever out of step with the world. You begin to see how society conspires to turn intelligence against itself. The pressure to perform, to excel, to stand out becomes a kind of poison, seeping into every thought, every ambition. You learn to measure your worth by your achievements, your value by your intellect. But the smarter you become, the higher the stakes, the greater the fear of failure. Perfectionism takes root, a silent tyrant that drives you to ever greater heights and ever deeper despair. You notice how the culture of competition breeds isolation, how the race to the top leaves little room for vulnerability, for connection, for rest. The intelligent are set apart, admired from a distance, but rarely understood. Their struggles are dismissed as the price of genius, their pain invisible behind a mask of competence. You wonder how many suffer in silence, how many are crushed by the weight of expectations they can never escape. You see how the myth of the lone genius distorts reality, turning intelligence into a solitary pursuit, a battle against the world. But the truth is messier, more complicated. The mind is not a fortress, but a labyrinth, a place of hidden corridors and secret rooms where monsters lurk in the shadows. The smarter you are, the more elaborate the maze, the more cunning the traps. You begin to suspect that the real danger lies not in intelligence itself, but in the way it is shaped and weaponized by culture, by upbringing, by the stories we inherit. The mind, left unchecked, becomes a mirror that reflects not just the world, but all its flaws, all its wounds. The more you see, the more you are forced to confront the darkness within and without. You think of the ways the mind turns on itself, through rumination, through self-criticism, through the endless replaying of past mistakes. You remember times when your thoughts became a cage, when every insight led to another question, another doubt, another reason to despair. You see how intelligence, when divorced from compassion, becomes a tool of self-torment, a way to magnify every flaw, every failure. You wonder if this is the hidden problem, that intelligence, for all its power, is fundamentally incomplete. The mind can analyze, dissect, understand, but it cannot heal, cannot comfort, cannot love. The smarter you become, the more you see the limits of reason, the emptiness at the heart of logic. You begin to crave something more, something beyond thought, beyond understanding. You sense that the roots of self-destruction run deep, tangled in the soil of childhood, watered by the expectations of parents, teachers, peers. You remember the first time you were praised for being smart, the rush of pride, the fear of losing that approval. You recall the sting of failure, the shame of not living up to your potential. You see how these early wounds shape the adult mind, driving you to prove yourself again and again, even as the goalposts keep moving. You realize that intelligence is not a shield but a magnifying glass, one that reveals not just the beauty of the world, but its ugliness, its pain. The more you see, the harder it becomes to look away. The mind, in its hunger for truth, becomes a glutton for suffering, unable to rest, unable to accept the world as it is. You begin to see the outlines of a deeper truth, that the mind, for all its brilliance, is haunted by a sense of lack, a feeling that something is missing. No matter how much you learn, how much you achieve, the hunger remains. The smarter you become, the more acute the sense of absence, the more desperate the search for meaning. You wonder if this is the real curse of intelligence, not that it leads to destruction, but that it reveals the impossibility of ever being whole, ever being satisfied. The mind, in its endless quest, becomes a wanderer, forever seeking, never finding. The smarter you are, the more you see the futility of the search, the emptiness at the heart of desire. And yet, even as you see the problem, you feel the pull of the mind, the lure of understanding. You cannot turn away, cannot stop thinking, cannot stop seeking. The paradox remains. The very thing that wounds you, is also the thing that drives you forward, that gives your life meaning, however fleeting. You sense that the journey is far from over, that the real consequences of this hidden problem have yet to be revealed. The mind, for all its brilliance, is a fragile thing, easily broken, easily lost. The smarter you become, the more you risk losing yourself in the labyrinth of your own thoughts. But you cannot stop now. The questions demand answers. The shadows demand light. You feel the tension building, the sense that something vast and terrible is waiting to be uncovered. What happens when the mind, in its quest for understanding, turns against itself? What are the unseen consequences of this hidden problem, the silent costs that accumulate in the darkness? As you move forward, you sense that the answers will not be easy, that the truth may be more unsettling than you can imagine. And yet, you cannot turn back. The journey continues, deeper into the heart of the paradox, deeper into the mystery of why smart minds fuel their own destruction. You carry the weight of these realizations with you, like a stone in your pocket, always there, always pressing against your awareness. The world moves on, indifferent to your inner turmoil, but you sense the invisible threads that bind your mind to a fate you never chose. The hidden problem is no longer just an idea, it is a living presence, shaping your every thought, every hesitation, every silent scream. But what are the true consequences of this invisible force? How does it shape not just your inner world, but the world you inhabit? You begin to notice the subtle ways in which intelligence, left unchecked, warps reality. It is not a sudden collapse, not a dramatic fall from grace, but a slow erosion, a gradual wearing away of certainty, of joy, of connection. The mind, in its relentless quest for understanding, becomes a double agent, sabotaging your happiness from within. You see it in the way you second-guess every decision, replaying conversations in your head until the words lose all meaning. You see it in the way you isolate yourself, convinced that no one else could possibly understand the complexity of your thoughts, the depth of your doubts. You remember the concept of cognitive biases, those invisible distortions that shape every perception, every judgment, every memory. The smarter you are, the more elaborate your rationalizations become, the more convincing your self-deceptions. Confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that supports your beliefs, becomes a fortress, protecting you from the discomfort of uncertainty. The Dunning-Kruger effect, the paradox that the less you know, the more confident you become, haunts you in reverse. The more you learn, the more you see the vastness of your ignorance, the more paralyzed you become by doubt. You think of the neurological roots of this self-sabotage, the way the brain, wired for survival, is ill-equipped to handle the complexities of modern life. The prefrontal cortex, seat of reason and planning, is constantly at war with the limbic system, the ancient engine of emotion and desire. The smarter you are, the more intense the conflict, the more exhausting the struggle to reconcile logic and feeling, hope and fear. You begin to see how intelligence, far from being a source of strength, can become a source of chronic stress, a never-ending battle between competing impulses. You notice how cultural conditioning amplifies these effects, turning intelligence into a weapon you wield against yourself. From an early age, you are taught to value achievement above all else, to measure your worth by your grades, your accolades, your ability to outthink the competition. But the smarter you become, the higher the expectations, the more crushing the fear of failure. Perfectionism becomes a prison, each success only raising the bar, each failure a confirmation of your deepest fears. You see it in the way you hesitate to try new things, paralyzed by the possibility of not being the best. You see it in the way you hide your struggles, afraid to reveal the cracks in your armor. You begin to understand how these unseen consequences ripple outward, shaping not just your own life, but the lives of those around you. Relationships become fraught with tension, every conversation a minefield of unspoken doubts and hidden insecurities. The smarter you are, the harder it becomes to connect, to be vulnerable, to let down your guard. You find yourself retreating into solitude, convinced that no one else could possibly understand the labyrinth of your mind. The very intelligence that sets you apart becomes a barrier, a wall that keeps others at a distance. You see it in the workplace, where the pressure to perform breeds competition instead of collaboration, suspicion instead of trust. The smartest minds become isolated, their insights dismissed as arrogance, their warnings ignored until it is too late. You notice how organizations reward conformity over creativity, how the fear of standing out stifles innovation, how the brightest ideas are often the first to be silenced. The unseen consequence is a culture of mediocrity, where intelligence is feared rather than celebrated, where the smartest minds are driven to the margins. You think of the larger societal consequences, the way intelligence, when divorced from empathy, becomes a tool of domination rather than liberation. The history of the world is littered with examples of brilliant minds who used their gifts to justify cruelty, to rationalize oppression, to build systems of control that crush the very spirit they were meant to elevate. You see it in the rise of technocracies, where expertise becomes a shield against accountability, where the complexity of the system becomes an excuse for inaction. The smarter the system, the more opaque its workings, the easier it becomes to hide injustice behind a veil of reason. You begin to sense the urgency of escaping this unseen trap, the need to break free from the patterns that bind you. But the mind, in its brilliance, is a master of self-justification, always finding new ways to avoid the discomfort of change. You notice how you cling to your doubts, your fears, your familiar patterns of self-sabotage, even as they destroy you. The smarter you are, the more elaborate your excuses, the more convincing your rationalizations. You see it in the way you procrastinate, telling yourself that you are waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect idea, the perfect plan. But the moment never comes, the idea never arrives, the plan never materializes. You realize that the true consequence of intelligence, left unchecked, is a kind of paralysis, a state of perpetual hesitation, of endless analysis, of never quite committing to anything. The mind, in its hunger for certainty, becomes a prisoner of its own complexity, unable to act, unable to rest. You see it in the way you avoid risk, choosing safety over growth, comfort over challenge. You see it in the way you retreat from the world, convinced that you are not ready, not worthy, not enough. You begin to see how this paralysis infects every aspect of life, turning potential into regret, possibility into loss. The smarter you are, the more you see the paths not taken, the opportunities missed, the lives unlived. You feel the weight of all the things you could have done, all the people you could have been, if only you had been less afraid, less cautious, less trapped by your own mind. You notice how the culture of constant comparison amplifies this effect, turning every achievement into a source of anxiety, every failure into a mark of shame. Social media becomes a hall of mirrors, reflecting back a distorted image of success, of happiness, of perfection. The smarter you are, the more you see through the illusion, the more you recognize the emptiness behind the facade. But knowing is not enough. The mind in its brilliance cannot help but compare, cannot help but judge, cannot help but find itself wanting. You begin to suspect that the real danger is not in the mind itself, but in the way it is used, the way it is shaped by forces beyond your control. The smarter you are, the more you see the cracks in the foundation, the flaws in the system, the emptiness at the heart of things. But seeing is not the same as changing. The mind, for all its power, is a creature of habit, a prisoner of its own patterns. You wonder if there is a way out, a way to break free from the unseen consequences of intelligence. You sense that the answer lies not in thinking more, but in thinking differently, in finding a new relationship to your mind, a new way of being in the world. But the path is unclear, the way forward shrouded in uncertainty. You feel the urgency of the moment, the sense that time is running out, that the cost of inaction is too great to bear. The world is changing faster than ever, the challenge is more complex, the stakes higher. The smartest minds are needed now more than ever, but they are trapped, paralyzed, consumed by their own brilliance. You wonder what it would take to break the spell, to awaken from the dream of self-destruction. You sense that the breakthrough is near, that the answer is just out of reach. The mind, for all its brilliance, is not the enemy. It is the tool, the instrument, the means by which you shape your reality. But to use it well, to use it wisely, you must first see the traps, the patterns, the unseen consequences that hold you back. You stand at the edge of a new understanding, the tension building, the sense of something vast and terrible waiting to be revealed. The mind, in its hunger for certainty, has led you to the brink of despair. But perhaps, just perhaps, the way out lies not in escaping the mind, but in transforming it, in finding a new way to relate to your thoughts, your doubts, your fears. The journey is far from over. The unseen consequences have been revealed, but the path to freedom remains hidden. You sense that the next step is not just to see the problem, but to rebel against it, to challenge the patterns that bind you, to reclaim your power, to build a new way of thinking. The time for hesitation is over. The moment of rebellion is at hand. The smartest minds must learn to break free, to turn their brilliance outward, to create rather than destroy. The future depends on it. And so you stand at the threshold, the unseen consequences behind you, the possibility of freedom ahead. The next step is yours to take. You stand at the threshold, the weight of unseen consequences pressing against your chest, the air thick with the residue of old patterns. The world feels both familiar and alien, as if you are seeing it through new eyes, eyes that have witnessed the cost of unchecked intelligence, the silent suffering of minds turned inward against themselves. The urge to break free pulses within you, a quiet rebellion gathering strength in the shadows of your thoughts. But how does one rebel against the mind itself? How do you challenge the very instrument that has shaped your reality, defined your identity, and set the boundaries of your world? The answer is not obvious, not easy. It requires a radical shift, a willingness to question everything you have been taught, everything you have believed about what it means to be smart, to be successful, to be alive. You begin by noticing the patterns, the automatic scripts that play out in your mind, the voice of perfectionism, whispering that nothing you do is ever enough, the echo of comparison, measuring your worth against the impossible standards of others, the relentless drive to analyze, to dissect, to control. You see these patterns for what they are: habits of thought, inherited from a culture that values achievement over authenticity, certainty over curiosity, control over connection. The first act of rebellion is to pause, to create a space between stimulus and response, between thought and action. In that space, you find the freedom to choose a different path. You remember the words of Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. You realize that the mind, for all its brilliance, is not your master. It is a tool, a servant, a means to an end. You begin to experiment with new ways of thinking, new ways of being. You challenge the assumption that intelligence is a solitary pursuit, a battle against the world. You seek out connection, vulnerability, collaboration. You share your doubts, your fears, your struggles, not as weaknesses to be hidden, but as invitations to deeper understanding. You discover that the smartest minds are not those who know the most, but those who are willing to learn, to change, to grow. You remember the stories of those who have broken free, rebels, visionaries, outcasts who refused to be defined by the limits of their minds. You think of Socrates, who claimed to know nothing and made a virtue of ignorance. You think of Leonardo da Vinci, whose genius lay not in certainty but in wonder, in the willingness to be surprised. You think of Marie Curie, who risked everything for the sake of discovery, who embraced uncertainty as the price of progress. You see that the true rebellion is not against the mind but against the tyranny of certainty, the prison of perfectionism, the illusion of control. You learn to embrace ambiguity, to welcome doubt as a sign of growth, to see failure not as a verdict but as a teacher. You realize that the smartest minds are those who can hold contradictions, who can live with uncertainty, who can dance on the edge of the unknown. You begin to cultivate new habits, habits of curiosity, of compassion, of presence. You practice mindfulness, learning to observe your thoughts without being consumed by them. You notice the way your mind jumps from one worry to the next, the way it clings to old stories, old fears. You learn to let go, to return to the present moment, to find peace in the midst of chaos. You discover the power of self-compassion, the radical act of treating yourself with the same kindness you offer to others. You realize that intelligence, without compassion, is a blade that cuts both ways. You learn to forgive yourself for your mistakes, to celebrate your progress, to honor your journey. You see that the smartest minds are not those who never fail, but those who know how to begin again. You seek out new perspectives, new voices, new ways of seeing the world. You read widely, Listen deeply. Question everything. You surround yourself with people who challenge you, who inspire you, who remind you that intelligence is not a fixed trait, but a living process, a dance between mind and world, self and other, question and answer. You remember the words of Jean-Paul Sartre, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." You realize that the rebellion is not a one-time event, but a daily practice, a commitment to living with intention, to choosing your response, to shaping your own destiny. You see that the smartest minds are those who refuse to be defined by their past, who use their pain as fuel for transformation. You begin to notice the changes, subtle at first, then unmistakable. The paralysis of overthinking gives way to action, to experimentation, to play. The fear of failure loses its grip, replaced by a sense of possibility, of adventure. The walls of isolation crumble, making room for connection, for community, for love. You see that the rebellion is contagious, that your courage inspires others to question their own patterns, to challenge their own assumptions, to break free from their own prisons. You become a beacon, a catalyst, a living example of what is possible when the mind is liberated from its own traps. You realize that the true measure of intelligence is not how much you know, but how well you live, how deeply you love, how bravely you act, how fully you embrace the mystery of existence. You see that the smartest minds are those who can hold the paradox, who can find meaning in the midst of uncertainty, who can create beauty from chaos. You remember the words of Aldous Huxley, "Experience is not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you." You realize that the rebellion is not about escaping the mind, but about transforming it, about using your intelligence to create, to connect, to heal. You begin to see the world with new eyes, to notice the beauty in the ordinary, the wonder in the everyday. You find joy in small victories, in moments of connection, in acts of kindness. You realize that the smartest minds are those who can find meaning in the mundane, who can turn suffering into wisdom, who can transform pain into purpose. You see that the rebellion is not a rejection of intelligence, but a celebration of its true potential, a recognition that the mind, when used wisely, is a force for good, a source of creativity, a wellspring of hope. You realize that the smartest minds are those who can use their gifts to serve others, to build bridges, to heal wounds. You remember the words of Carl Jung, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." You realize that the rebellion is a choice to live with courage, with compassion, with curiosity. You see that the smartest minds are those who choose to create, to connect, to love. You feel the power of this realization, the sense of liberation, of possibility, of hope. The mind, once a prison, becomes a code playground, a place of exploration, of discovery, of joy. You realize that the rebellion is not the end, but the beginning. A new way of being, a new way of seeing, a new way of living. You stand at the edge of a new reality, the old patterns falling away, the future wide open. The rebellion has begun, and you are its leader, its architect, its living proof. The smartest minds are no longer doomed to self-destruction. They are free to create, to connect, to thrive. The journey is not over. The ultimate truth awaits, a final, most powerful realization that will redefine everything you thought you knew. But for now, you savor the taste of freedom, the thrill of rebellion, the promise of a new beginning. The smartest minds have broken free. The world will never be the same. You stand in the aftermath of rebellion, the air electric with possibility. The old world, the world of self-sabotage, of brilliance turned inward, of minds devouring themselves, lies behind you like a discarded skin. You have tasted freedom, glimpsed the power of a mind unshackled from its own traps. Yet, as the dust settles, a deeper question emerges, more haunting than any before. What now? What is the ultimate truth that waits beyond the rebellion, shimmering just out of reach, promising to change everything? You feel it in the silence that follows the storm, in the hush that descends when the mind finally grows quiet. It is not an answer, but a presence, a sense that something vast and mysterious is drawing near. You realize that all your striving, all your questioning, all your desperate attempts to outthink your own destruction have led you here, to the edge of a new understanding. The paradox remains, but it no longer terrifies you. Instead, it beckons, inviting you to step beyond the limits of thought into a realm where the mind is no longer the master, but the servant of something greater. You remember the words of the mystics, the poets, the philosophers who have walked this path before you. Rainer Maria Rilke, who wrote, "Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. You realize that the ultimate truth is not something you can grasp, possess, or control. It is something you must live, something you must become." You look back on your journey, the moments of doubt, the nights of despair, the flashes of insight that lit up the darkness. You see now that every step, every stumble, every act of rebellion was necessary. The mind, in its hunger for certainty, had to be broken open, its illusions shattered, its defenses stripped away. Only then could you see what was always there, waiting in the silence beneath the noise. The ultimate truth is this: intelligence is not an end in itself. It is not the summit, but the path. The mind, for all its brilliance, is only one aspect of your being, a tool, a guide, a companion on the journey. The real power lies not in thinking, but in being, not in knowing, but in living, not in conquering the world, but in surrendering to it. You realize that the smartest minds fuel their own destruction, not because they are flawed, but because they are incomplete. The mind, left to its own devices, becomes a closed system, a hall of mirrors reflecting only itself. It hungers for meaning, for connection, for transcendence, but it cannot find these things within its own walls. The more it strives, the more it suffers. The more it knows, the more it aches for something beyond knowledge. You see now that the answer is not to think harder, but to think less, to let go of the need for certainty, for control, for mastery. The mind must learn to serve the heart, to listen to the body, to trust the wisdom of experience. Intelligence, when integrated with compassion, with presence, with humility, becomes something greater than itself. It becomes wisdom. You remember the words of Lao Tzu: "To know that you do not know is the best. To pretend to know when you do not know is a disease." You realize that the ultimate truth is not a destination, but a way of being, a willingness to live in the mystery, to embrace the unknown, to find beauty in the questions themselves. You feel a profound sense of peace, a stillness that settles deep in your bones. The mind, once a battlefield, becomes a garden, a place of growth, of play, of wonder. You see that the smartest minds are those who can hold the paradox, who can live with uncertainty, who can find joy in the dance between knowing and not knowing. You look around and see the world anew. The people you once envied, the achievements you once coveted, the fears that once haunted you, all seem smaller now, less urgent, less real. You realize that the true measure of intelligence is not how much you know, but how deeply you can love, how fully you can live, how bravely you can let go. You remember the words of Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in the midst of suffering. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. You see that the ultimate rebellion is not against the world, but against the tyranny of your own mind. The final act of freedom is to surrender, to trust that life in all its chaos and uncertainty is enough. You feel the truth of this in your own life. The moments when you stopped striving, stopped searching, stopped trying to outthink your own pain. In those moments, you found a deeper wisdom, a quieter strength, a sense of belonging that no amount of intelligence could provide. You realize that the mind, for all its brilliance, is only a doorway, a threshold you must cross to enter the fullness of your own being. You see now that the smartest minds are not those who conquer the world, but those who are conquered by it, who allow themselves to be changed, to be humbled, to be opened by the mystery of existence. The ultimate truth is not a secret to be discovered, but a reality to be lived, a way of being that honors the mind without being enslaved by it. You remember the words of Carl Jung: "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." You realize that the journey was never about escaping the mind, but about integrating it, about bringing all the parts of yourself into harmony, about finding your place in the great unfolding of life. You feel a sense of awe, a reverence for the mystery that surrounds you. The mind, once a source of suffering, becomes a source of wonder, a lens through which you glimpse the infinite, the eternal, the sacred. You realize that the ultimate truth is not something you can possess, but something that possesses you, a force that moves through you, that shapes your life, that calls you to become more than you ever imagined. You look back one last time at the path you have traveled, the questions, the struggles, the moments of despair and hope. You see now that every step was necessary, that every wound was a doorway, that every act of rebellion was an act of love. The mind, for all its brilliance, could never have brought you here on its own. It had to be broken, humbled, transformed. You turn toward the future, the unknown stretching out before you like a vast uncharted sea. You feel no fear, only curiosity, only wonder. The mind, once your master, is now your companion, a trusted friend, a wise guide, a playful partner in the dance of life. You realize that the ultimate truth is not the end of the journey, but the beginning. The smartest minds are those who can live in the mystery, who can embrace the unknown, who can find meaning in the questions themselves. The mind, when integrated with the heart, becomes a force for creation, for connection, for transformation. You feel the world calling to you, inviting you to step into the fullness of your own being. The journey is not over, it has only just begun. The smartest minds are those who can surrender to the mystery, who can trust the wisdom of life, who can become who they truly are. As the sun rises on a new day, you take your first breath, the air crisp and clean, the world alive with possibility. You feel the weight of the past fall away, replaced by a sense of lightness, of freedom, of joy. The mind, once a prison, is now a code playground, a place of endless discovery, of boundless creativity, of infinite wonder. You walk forward into the unknown, the ultimate truth burning bright within you. The smartest minds are no longer doomed to self-destruction. They are free to create, to love, to live. The journey continues, and you are ready. You are free.